This is the Vivobarefoot Magna ESC. This is more of the outdoor line for Vivobarefoot. We'll first get into the weight. All right, we're at 0. So here for the freedom measurements, we have 2 pounds and just under an ounce. There's the weight of 1 pound and just under an ounce. I think this one's just an ounce heavier because of this one has an insole and this one doesn't. And by the way, mine are obviously a little different because I've changed out the insole and the laces here. And for the non-freedom measurements, we're at 931 grams for both and 477 for one. My size is a 43 European and a size 10 men's US. I think we'll start on the outsole. The outsole, I believe it's 2 millimeters thick for the base here, you know, where that Michelin is, basically from the bottom to the midsole inside here, insole. And then 9 millimeters for the tread part here. So it's a very tread thick base light boot. I would kind of at first think that's a good thing, but I've heard 2 criticisms. One I have experienced, one I haven't. The one I haven't experienced is because usually I change out the insoles on mine. Is I have had like a thorn or something break through the base layer there. And I'm not going through particularly heavy thorn country. So if it busts through there, in theory, I could get water penetration through there, and that would compromise the water resistance of the boot significantly because it's underneath. The other one I've heard is that people said that it lessens the comfort because when you're stepping on that heavy tread, it's pushing inside your foot in a way that is not comfortable, whereas the base would kind of cradle your foot in a different type of way. The traction on these is exceptional. In fact, these are probably the only barefoot boot I would say are work ready. I would ideally use these for outdoor work. But I've looked at most other barefoot type of boots, or tried a lot too. I've tried dozens, and these are the only ones I think that are built in a way that would get enough tread for outdoors, have enough durability for outdoors, etc. I believe I've used these, I don't measure, for about 300 to 500 miles, maybe more. So you can see that in the wear right there. And again, I would say they probably would last about 1,000 miles, maybe probably less. And the reason for that is that you would think that kind of a tread heavy boot would last a lot longer because they're thick like the Vibram Montagnas, but it's the composition of it. Not all rubbers are the same, and not all rubbers are rubber. I believe these are like 20% natural rubber, 30% synthetic rubber, and they're mostly what they call additives. And I believe the additive is polyurethane. Now, the reason you would go for a softer type of material is, yes, it would wear faster, but you would get more comfort from it, and it would give you more traction. And that's, I believe, just because the material is more likely to flex for the environment you're stepping in to adapt to it, as opposed to a softer rubber. It might be more, or stronger rubber, but it might be more durable, but it's going to be more slippy ultimately in that sort of traction when you're stepping. So they've chosen for something that's a little bit more grippy, and it makes sense because, you know, if it's meant to be used outdoors, that's what it's for. My biggest con with this outsole is I've never had anything in my life that collected so much mud. This is the type of boot that you just do not take indoors, or you're going to piss off whoever the homeowner is. Usually you have to hose them off, or you leave them out sores and then you pick off the mud the next day type of deal. They don't have the type of outsole that's mud clearing that kind of will wash out, in theory, supposed to wash out through it. It just gets stuck and then it clots, and then you kind of get a knotted over boot, which doesn't work too well for my environment because I'm in a very muddy area. I think these would work best in an area that's a little bit more dry, especially if it's something that's very rocky, like shale or something like that. And that leads to the other con I have with the outdoor part of it. Again, it's just 2 pounds, which you would say is kind of lightweight for a outdoor boot, but I believe that these are a little bit too clunky. They're very heavy in the back. They're like a fat-backed whale or something. So, and that's when you do wear barefoot boots or shoes, you're in theory supposed to step more in the midfoot or the forefront because that's where your muscles are. And there's no muscles in the back of the heel. So in theory, when you're stepping on your heel, you're stepping on bone that goes up your legs and back, which yada yada is not supposed to be good for you. This one, because it's so heavy in the back, I just find that it's not easy to move in a way that I'm landing in the forefront just from my natural locomotion. I could still force it, but that's just from what I've experienced. Part of why I find is that it juts out too much in the back here. You see how there's that back of your leg, and that, if you imagine your heels like starts here, right? And so then with this jutting back and you're stepping, it's just more likely to catch on and you land on it. So you can tell by the wear pattern, I have plenty of wear here. It doesn't even start here or in this midfoot, but it definitely translates to that front foot too. So that's the criticism I have for it. I think it adds too much weight and it's too clunky. It's too clunky. I have no idea why this exists here. I think it would make sense if you're kind of sliding down a rock or shale or something like hill, it would catch on. But as you can see from my use, it's not been used. And then just from this side part here, it does provide structure. Most barefoot companies will not really have like a heel cup because they want it to be, oh, your barefoot's doing all the work type of bullshit. But these ones do give you kind of a heel cup just by cradling your foot that way with that. But I do find it's just a little bit too rigid. I mean, it's just bizarre that this front here does not have this sidewall, which you're probably scraping plenty. I mean, you can tell I've scraped it plenty, and it's very low in certain parts here, but in this back part, it's just super bulky. So that's my thing that I would change. I would probably rate the outsole a 4 out of 5. If you're using it for outdoor work, I would give it a 5 out of 5 and just rate it on a scale just because, and I'm giving it on a curve just because I think they're the best, and really I think they're the only boot that I would really highly recommend for outdoors without much change. They do make other outdoor models with different outsoles. The thing I would not recommend with them is, as you can see here, there's stitching on the sidewall. And it's barely, you can see just a little bit of fraying here, but it really has not gone into the actual stitching part itself. So this sidewall stitch has been perfect. You always have to ask with the outdoor company what their goals are. With Vivobarefoot, I think there's 3. They try to be eco-conscious, they try to be stylish, and they try to be fit like a style, like a work style, for example. And so you kind of have sometimes those compete with each other. One part where this is not all glues are the same. And I don't think they use the best glues in their outsoles. So you kind of do want that extra assurability with the sidewall stitch there. One con with this still is that sidewall stitch isn't going to necessarily prevent water coming from inside, like right there, because I can just go through the stitching, etc. I have not personally had that as a problem though with these ones. Now, I will say if you're using an outdoor a leather conditioner, I've kind of cheated on these and I've used Obanoffs. Obanoffs are like a nice outdoor leather conditioner, but they are a wax-based. Most of them are wax-based. Waxes can get underneath the leather and delaminate the glue, just so you know. So in between those layers. So there's water-based ones. The water-based don't work as well as the wax-based, but I'll go into that later. But to sum up, I would not buy any Vivobarefoot boot that was not side stitched, period. I don't think their glues hold up as well. They've had other outdoor ones kind of what I was originally going on that did not have the sidewall stitching. I would want something for myself that did not have so much tread that was collecting mud. That's mostly because of the environment I'm in. I would choose these for durability over everything else they offer for this outsole at least, period. But unfortunately, the other ones, they just did not have the sidewall stitch. More recently, they've come up with other ones that use a sidewall stitch that are outdoor that you would want to use I would want to use a harder rubber or compounds that wore better. But unfortunately, it's less tread, but it uses the same material compound, so it's just going to wear faster than this. And I would find that the other new models are a little bit too busy. What I like about this one is that this is just a single piece of leather that runs along the sides here. As you can see, the back here is plastic. So there's very little room for, if you had like a stitched in leather toe bumper type of here, the water can get in the stitching can wear out, etc. So it's just more room for water to get in or for durability issues. So I would rather just have a big, thick piece of leather like this. And so I guess now we're moving into the leather section of the upper. I would give these, the leather of this, I would personally say it's a 4 out of 5, a 3 out of 5. But I would say, again, kind of rating it on a curve, it's a 4 out of 5 leather. It is a really nice leather. It's a thick leather, like I was saying. It's pretty much a boot leather is what I would say. And it's a very minimal design underneath. It's mostly just this wool type material. I do like it when a company just uses a thick piece of leather, not multiple layers of leather, because multiple layers of leather it just messes up with the breathability. It's just more parts that can wear out, etc. So kind of like if you look at limer boots literally are just stitched in one spot, but it's a little wraparound of leather the entire length of the boot. So I much prefer that design just because it doesn't allow much water to get through. And as I said, I've never had a experience where I felt like the boots wet out at all. There's probably my best cut there, but it's not penetrated into the leather yet either. So I do think the leather does scuff pretty easy. Usually when I wax it, it actually hides it pretty well, but I definitely have plenty of marking on the leather. The reason I don't personally like the leather, and since these ones are about 3 years old now, they might have changed a little bit. I have not had a leather that dried out as fast as this one. I've had to consistently oil these boots, and if I did not have oil, I had to make compromises basically. And I know this is gonna farm the downvotes from the social media crowd, but I've even had to use like bar and chain oil before because I was worried that the areas here were going to dry out and crack. But as you can see, I've compromised with all sorts of oils for these boots and they still look fine. So again, that one mark was probably the only one that was the most concerning. I don't like particularly how I could see why it comes down so low on the outsole there, because it's where it bends and you don't necessarily want it to bend like here because it's more likely going to cut off from the stitching there, if that makes sense. I can give you an example. So here's a more recent pair of boots that I'll review later. These boots bend where it juts out here, and unfortunately it's just led. These are very young boots in comparison, and it's just led to it delaminating there. So I don't know why. It does make sense why you would have it go downward where it bends, because it's more flat basically. It's more like a welted sole where it bends, but it does lead to more scratches coming in those regions of the boot. So, and like I said, this one's probably the only one that I'd say is very concerning. So is this going to hold up as well as a work boot? No, of course not. Like a legitimate, really nice work boot. I mean, it's definitely not compared to like a Pacific Northwest boot just because you're further off the ground. But even other work boots, like if you look at Mindles or Loas or whatever, they're going to have a rubber, a side bumper stitched around to prevent that type of abrasion or water entering. So of course it's not going to do that. You are making a compromise by going with a barefoot boot. So yes, my major con with the leather is just that it just dries out super fast. So that's what I don't like about it. I've been worried about it cracking at several points. It definitely, I mean, I just oiled these, by the way, so they don't look terrible, but yep, they dry out super quick. So this part here, I was a little bit worried about this, but I have not had a problem. There's literally no marking on any of this here. So, yep. It's kind of interesting when you look at the design of this boot. You would think, I mean, it is technically a boot because it's about 4 inches off of the ground before it reaches your body, but it's kind of, when you tuck this under, it's the design of a shoe, really. So it's the most shoe-like boot I would say I've ever worn, and I even compare that to the Chelsea boots and in the design. You know, as you probably have noticed, I've mostly reviewed Chelsea boots, and this is the closest thing I've ever come to the Chelsea boot. And I've changed it out with the elastic laces, and I can almost find that I don't even need laces for these to fit well. For my foot, they go in super easy. Unlike most companies, they actually use a really nice strap here that you can just loop your finger on and it holds, and it's been pretty durable. I do have a little bit wear on this one right there, but other than that, they've held up fine. The front one though, totally useless. This thing sucks. I would just get rid of it if I was Vivobarefoot, but you don't really need it. I mean, you just hold on the back and then you slide your foot in sideways and then kind of corkscrew it in, and then it's locked in. So, yeah, it's the most shoe-like boot I've ever worn. I was worried at first about this weather, the wool part here being crap, letting in tons of water, and then, or, you know, coming undone. There's definitely fraying on it, but it's not, mine have not had a lot of wear on them. So, and I've gone through plenty of blackberries with them as well. So they haven't gotten stuck and pulled my leg or anything. It's definitely tight enough to where I never had an issue. So, yeah, I mean, if this was like a Chelsea, I would say it's the closest to kind of like a hybrid that works as an action Chelsea without being too clunky or heavy overall. This part here that's holding the laces, usually the way they put these in here where you hold the laces to kind of keep it from sliding to one way or another. But since it goes up the entire way, it's not really an issue. But there's definitely plenty of wear on those from there, and as you can see right here. So I would probably reinforce that. Also for the uppers, now I've heard, I think the newer ones use plastic now, at least for this top, gosh, I don't even know what those are called, speed hooks. But I'm not really sure why they use metal. I have heard some of the ones on this part right here coming undone. I would be worried about, not that as you can see, there's plenty of wax in there. Not that I've ever had a problem with it or tried it, but I don't really tie mine too tight. But if you put wax in there, sometimes it can loosen the leather and it can pop them out. It's not a problem I had. I'm guessing they just switched to plastic for a reason. I don't know. I do think it's kind of unnecessary weight to the boot. They're definitely plenty sturdy, which kind of explains why I would put more tension on the leather. So, yeah, plenty of wear on them though. What else can we... I think that's pretty much it for the uppers. Again, I've not had an issue with these wetting out, even though I'm not in an environment that gets heavy rain, but I'm in an environment that's consistently rainy, dewy, type of environment, and I've not had an issue with these getting wetted out. I've been fishing, I've gone through plenty of ferns, other stuff like that. Obviously, if I'm going to get it through the top and it's going to sink into the bottom, that's one thing, but I would say the main area where it's going to wet out is, well, there's not mesh on this boot, so it's not going to breathe like, you know, your synthetic type of boot. So, you know, the breathability is going to be a lower rating, just automatically. I don't think you could really get above a 3 with leather unless they've holes punched in the side, or something like that. So, yeah, primarily from the inside, it's going to be because you're sweating out inside the boot. And that does lead to a little bit of an issue I'll get into that kind of here in a second. So the outsole I've pretty much used with these is, right now I'm using the free. This is their eTPU insole. It's not a super thick insole, but the eTPU is a very comfortable insole. The reason I'm using another insole is because the Vivobarefoot insoles are kind of like what I was talking about with an eco company. They have made a significant compromise with the insoles. I believe their insole is like Save the Planet type of initiative. So it's a combination of who the fuck knows. I mean, it's like they throw in probably polyurethane from other outsoles or insoles. I don't know. I think it says it's like rubber, polyurethane cork maybe. I'm almost positive on the cork and polyurethane part. So they kind of do that. It's spongy, but it's too spongy. It's too soft. It doesn't really, for me, it doesn't really provide any comfort. So I'm pretty sure across the board I've read that the insoles are, I've never seen anybody compliment the insoles basically. So I think they're garbage. I would trade them out for something. I know a lot of people don't go with insoles because I don't want any cushioning. I don't think if you're looking at the inside there that you would really want to go without insoles, just because you have parts stitching in there that would probably wear out a little bit faster if your foot was consistently causing friction with it, but to each their own. You could also just use a thin one. But kind of what I was going on the breathability part, my one problem with using the Freeze is that because I'm sweating more heavily on the inside, these don't absorb any or a lot of sweat. So they do kind of feel like they sweat out from the inside a little bit faster than, you know, your average shoe would be, especially like a mesh shoe. I've tried plenty of others with these ones. I think I first started with these Mindel insoles, these cork ones. Yes, these are a little bit raised in the back. That kind of cradles your foot, so that's not as tall as it looks. As you can see, it's very inset in there. But there was quite a bit of squeaking in the back when I wore these. Although for kind of climate control, I would say these probably worked the best in terms of it would absorb enough sweat that it wasn't miserable on the inside. And I've always found the comfort of cork very good. Cork does run a little bit warmer though. The other insole I've not been able to really get the wool ones in there, because I usually find even though you can pad the wool in a little bit, maybe if I broke one of these Canadian ones in a little bit more, it would work, but it's too thick. And that kind of leads to my next problem and why I'm using the free version, is that the, just the, what's it called? The volume of the foot. So the volume would be like how much height there is from here to the bottom. Usually the reason I'm so crazy about insoles is that usually I have a lower volume foot, which means I don't have a very tall foot. I don't have a super high arch. So I don't have a lot that's pushing up. And usually that affects the fit of the boot. So a lot of times I have problems where I have to over tighten boots to get them to fit. But as you can see, these are very loose because this is not a high volume kind of front part to the boot. It's a lower volume boot. And so it just means that I don't have as much building layer to do the insoles. And a lot of times I use those because I have too low volume of a foot and I need more volume so that I can get more room on the laces to actually tighten the boot. So these ones I'm kind of restricted to something a little bit thinner, which does lead to those sweat problems on the inside. The worst part about the volume I've found is in the big toe. So I don't know what it is. I think it's this one in particular. And it's kind of, if you look at the design here, it's not entirely flat. For some reason it raises in that big toe, and it might have been because they sewn that big toe in just a little bit too much. So something about my big toe here just does not have enough volume that it kind of feels like it gets scrunched up. You know what I mean? And I'm sort of fighting with it. And so as you can probably see with these, what that translates to is that my big toe kind of pushes more, instead of it going more straight like it should, it pushes it more inward because this part here is too narrow or thin and it pushes it that way. Usually the problem I have with boots is that this goes in too much and pushes it in, but it's literally, in this case, it's the volume that's restricting it from going outward. I suppose that leads into the ergonomics, or like the toe box width. I would give the width of this boot like a 3. I don't think Vivobarefoots are known for being particularly wide. They're wider than most shoes, but they're not wide for a barefoot shoe. These ones I would say are pretty good width for me. The problem is that what I was just explaining with the volume of the shoe. It's just a little bit too low, and that's what pushes it in. So I'm not even using like this part here of the shoe. It's dead going in here, so I'm not even able to use that full width. But I would say this is mostly foot shaped for me. But I think a lot of people would find that these are not wide enough for them, which is why I give it a 3 out of 5. It's not something that I would find that I'm able to use with like toe spreaders or anything like that. So I think it's kind of a better entry barefooter if you just want like a wider shoe, but not great if you're wanting, you know, the monkey fit wide. As for sizing, I am a 10 US, a 43 European. These are 43 European. It's a European company. Before I forget, by the way, I'm sure some people like Vivobarefoot because they have the Revivo service. Just so you know, the resole service only is for the UK. So they will not resole them if you're in the US or any other part of the world, as far as I last checked. But I would say these fit perfectly for their size. I have tried to size up on these. I have some sort of a weird thing with sizing up. And I would not recommend sizing up with these boots. Usually if you have a really good lacing design, I find that you can size up and then you have more room to put, you know, a thicker insole in. You can just tighten the laces down more or less, depending on what you're putting inside. You can change your socks to very thick socks or very thin socks. I don't find that Vivobarefoots have a great enough lacing design that you can really size up and not feel like you're floating around on the inside. This type of design that's more of a one-piece leather usually struggle a little bit more. I don't really have a problem with the fit with these, by the way. It's just when I tried size 44, that I did have a problem with that. The reason though I did go with these in terms of fit over the Forest are like more of a traditional 6 to 8 inch leather boot, so it goes up here instead of using the wool here, is not just because I'm a lazy piece of shit that likes more of a Chelsea type of fit, but I found that the Forest, for some reason, like if there was like a tang in the boot when you stand in it, it pushed it more back. It might have been the way that it laced up there. It just made me always like rest on my heels. And usually I find that barefoot boots are not the best for standing around all day. I find them a bit uncomfortable for standing around. But with this one model and size, I don't have an issue with either of that. I can lean forward and actually sort of balance my foot a little bit better. So earlier I already kind of answered the question, what's the purpose of this boot? I would say it's the work boot. Again, I've looked at most models. I don't think, gosh, if there was one other, I'd have to recommend probably the Belleville Mini Mills. But the Belleville Mini Mills don't use side stitching. They kind of have a lacing problem. So they have other problems that I would kind of hesitantly recommend the Belleville Mini Mill. But I would say these are the best in terms of a work shoe that's a barefoot boot. And again, because you're choosing a barefoot boot, you're already going to make a compromise in terms of durability, you know, function, etc. You're talking about more of like an early market for a design versus a much more mature market that has plenty more money and design and research into it, etc. Not that it won't change in the future, but that's the purpose that I would say that these are for. Again, my one con would be for that is that like what they're designed for is I would not recommend them, you know, if they're going to be your everyday shoes that you're going to be going in and outdoors in the house with, especially if you're in a muddy environment, because you will be tracking and somebody will put a bounty on you and they'll have the dirt trail straight to you. So, again, I think you have to ask what the manufacturer's goal with this. I do think that even though I don't recommend most of Vivobarefoot, and I don't recommend most of Vivobarefoot's outdoor stuff, at least in the past, I do think this one hit the nail on the head. I don't know, if the eco-conscious or style stuff got in the way at all, but or if this was a fluke, but I definitely think that they kind of hit their mark on this one. So would I buy this again? Personally, I would not. And the only reason for that is because unless I had a very specific job that I would use these for, I would not. And I just, particularly with my environment, if I probably lived in somewhere like more of a drier climate, I would be totally fine with these. But because my climate's so muddy, I'm just constantly tracking mud. And usually the mud cakes the whole layer, and then I kind of lose any sense of the traction anyways in the first place. And so then I'm kind of walking around with a boot that weighs more heavy because all the mud's inside of it. So if I was in a different work environment or environment, yeah, I would totally buy them again. But for me, I'll probably try something else. And for work, I would use like just a lower. I know I'm going to compromise here. I would just use a boot with a heel drop. I would probably use the Belleville C320. That's probably what I'll try next for kind of a work environment, just because I'd rather have something with I think they almost weigh as much. I think the Belleville C320s weigh 20 ounces. They have a bit of a heel. I don't know what it is, but I just don't like. I usually call them wedge models, and wedges are usually where it juts out here and comes flush through here. But I don't see why they put all this crap here in the middle, because I think it impacts the flexibility of the boot. And as you can see, I have very little wear in that middle part, so it's just adding extra weight, and it screws with the flexibility. So I don't know, I've never found wedges very comfortable. I don't like them in like the red back boots. Even I've had people that love red back boots, including like people with higher arches. So I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I don't typically like those designs. And if I'm going to have a heel type of design or a thicker boot design, I kind of would rather, even if it was minimalist, if they just got rid of some of this. I mean, I could see, this for like if you're sliding down a rope or something, but it doesn't need that much tread. And I think it would make it more of a flexible boot. So that's my opinion there, and that's what I'd go with. Yes, I'd compromise and just not use a barefoot boot for a work type situation, but I would still say, these are kind of the MVP for a work boot. And I mean, the barefoot boots have been around quite a long time now, and so I just don't see any competition for that. I think the one other consideration for this would be the pricing. Vivobarefoots tend to be expensive boots. And gosh, I think I got these for maybe 180 or 200 a few years ago, but now I think they're 250 to 300. And gosh, I mean, that might only go up in the future. So I'm sure people spend that much and think these boots are resolable, but they're really not, unless you're in the UK. So I will say, when I bought mine, they were not 180 when I bought them, but back then at least, you could kind of exploit the refer a friend thing where people online would share their referral codes, and I think, gosh, you could get like 20 to 30% off of the boots. So for Vivobarefoot, I would highly recommend waiting for a sale or seeing if you can get one of those refer a friend type of bonuses to get a discount for them, because they're much more expensive for an outdoor boot. It makes sense. I'm pretty sure they're one of those companies that tries to pay their employees a fair price. Again, they're trying to be ecological, yada, yada, yada. But, and definitely, probably, because they're a well-known brand name, they probably up the price a little bit. But, yeah, I would just definitely consider that, just because, I mean, I can get, for example, the Belleville C320s, I can personally get them for like 130 with a discount with government discount, but I think, gosh, what do they cost without it? I think it's like 180 maybe. So you're still paying less for a boot that weighs the same as a boot. It goes up higher. That's probably more durable of an outsole. So I don't know. But it sure is nice to slip these on. So that belt covers it, and hopefully this helps you with your purchase.